Hello, my name is Bryan Davis. I'm a senior system engineer with Forescout, and today's session is on Zero Trust and how to take that framework to a reality following NIST 1835 special publication as a Zero Trust blueprint and using Microsoft and Forescout as the tools prescribed by NIST to fulfill that blueprint. So who are we? Forescout discovers all your connected devices. We do this agentlessly, and we do this in conjunction with over 100 of your network and security technologies. With that, we detect, collect, and classify everything on your IT, OT, your IoT, your medical devices, you name it. Every connected device gets the same detect, collect, and classification on your network. With that discovery in place, we're able to start assessing these devices. Are they authorized to be on the network? Are they known devices? Are they compliant? What risk do they carry that affects your business continuity? We do this continuously, which is a core tenet of Zero Trust. Does it happen nonstop and unintrusively? And is it real time? And also, is this assessment criteria flexible to your organization? These are not criteria that Forescout put upon you, but your own organization's compliance criteria. With this information in hand, Forescout's unique in that we're able to govern your network. We can take action, right? Because information without action is a liability. And so when people hear action, and as a NAC company of 25 years, people think blocking, right? Blocking is only one action that Forescout's able to take, again, in conjunction with your security tools. We can notify, we can remediate, and we can restrict. So you could create ServiceNow tickets. You could update the AV that is non-compliant, or sure, you could segment into a compliance remediation zone so it can be returned once the blast radius is reduced. But action, we're sure to take the appropriate response, the intelligent response, not simply blocking. So Zero Trust obviously been talked about a lot. It's been around for a while. Why are we talking about it now? Mainly because there's no more guessing. The NIST special publication has finally provided a Zero Trust framework for people to adopt without guessing or trying to understand what Zero Trust means. To blow this up and kind of walk through it here, basically at the very center here, we have policy decision points. And just to make sense of this, we've got a subject, a user endpoint, bottom left here, that wants to connect to this resource over here. It could be cloud or on-prem. Traditionally we might put one or two layers in between typical castle and moat type of access where does it have a cert, does it have a certain agent, can it get on, etc. Zero Trust, what it's trying to do is say, let's make a decision at each point that we can if this device can access the resource. And so that's a decision. And those decision points, as defined by NIST, include Microsoft Intune, Microsoft Sentinel. These are some of the tools that are going to be making these decisions, as well as Forescout's iControl and iExtend. Are we going to allow this device on and allow it to stay on? Well, let's see. In order to make that decision, we need information. And so these policy information points on the right, this is basically the set of tools recommended by NIST for gathering the information to properly make a decision. Included here is an endpoint security. We're looking at Microsoft Intune, data collected from Intune, points collected from Defender for Endpoint, and Forescout iSight, for example. In the analytics side, we're looking at what does Sentinel have on the device? How about segmentation information from and flow data from Forescout iSegment, as well as more device info and analytics from Forescout iSight. So with all this information in tow, it's fed back to the decision point so that it can then make a decision on how we're going to enforce this device. And again, you'll see the enforcement heavily Microsoft combined with other tools in your stack, such as Palo's next-gen firewall. And this is circled because Forescout is the orchestrator that will take that decision and then execute the action to the firewall. So in that way, the Forescout platform becomes the orchestrator, gathering the information, orchestrating amongst the tools. Are you allowed to stay connected? Should I send a message to the SOC? Should I put a ticket in for a technician? Action, 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 orchestrated by Forescout. And of course, Forescout can also interact with the Microsoft suite. Let's send we have a finding from, let's say, Microsoft Intune that's not compliant. So let's send a restrict action to Defender, or a isolate to Defender, or how about a tag to Defender? So we're able to orchestrate those two tools together. Now, one part that I think is overlooked on this diagram of NIST is the key on the left here, which simply says, between each of these boxes, there's I's and S's, and that just stands for initial connection or session management. And so this really, in a much more convoluted way, I guess we could say, defines what makes zero trust, because all this is saying is that it is continuous. We are looking to take these decisions and these enforcement actions at initial connection as well as during the session. So the analogy I always use is it's like letting someone in the house is the initial connection, but then once they're in the house, they're able to open windows, turn on the gas range, steal your stuff, whatever they want to do from within. So with zero trust, we want to continuously check these same decision points to say, should this session remain intact or should I modify it in some way? And that's the initial action as well as the session management for that zero trust continuity, which I will display here. Subject wants to connect to the resource. So the enforcement point says, hey, should I let this thing connect? That sounds like a decision. Let's send it to the decision point, make that decision. Well, a decision point needs information. So we take all of our known components that we have for this device and we say, yes, it is compliant. Yes, it is mine. Yes, it has the certificate I need. Yes, it has BitLocker enabled. Yes, it has a vulnerability scan in 2 days, etc. It comes back to the decision point and says, this is a good device. We're going to let this on. So all happening in real time, the device is able to access the resource. Now, traditionally, with a CAS 1 mode, it would stop here. But zero trust demands that we continue this process. And so now, with the initial connection made, we want to monitor the session. Again, is this still compliant? Should I keep this on the network? Should I send a ticket? Should I do a remediation? That's a decision. And to make that decision, we need information. So again, we leverage these tools, Forescout, 𝗦𝗽𝗀, Microsoft Defender, Intune, to get that information. And then once again, Intune, Defender, iControl, iExtend, they make this decision and then send the enforcement action, which in this case, let's keep it on the network. No changes required. And this happens continuously with periodic reauthentication challenges to make sure it can still be online anyway. So with that in mind, when you look at each of those boxes, you see a ton of Microsoft and Forescout, all of Forescout's products, all of Microsoft's products in there. Why Forescout and why Microsoft? And the reason is Microsoft does a great job inside of your managed devices using Intune, Defender, Purview, Sentinel. These are highly secure devices. You can count on them being safe. The issue lies in blind spots in your managed devices. So if you get a device that's not onboarded properly, get a device that is the agent's no longer communicating. You get a device that has AV out of date. It misses Windows updates. It didn't get its reboot. It has default or weak credentials, for example. Well, with automation and AI being the way it is for attackers, making it a lot easier to find that one chink in the armor, it's important that these blind spots are reeled back into the managed devices. And that's where Forescout comes in. That doesn't even consider the unagentable and unmanageable devices like your cameras, your badge readers, your printers, your BYOD devices that these tool sets are unable to cover by themselves. With Forescout, we're able to bring all those devices into that entire attack surface under protection by basically installing, starting, fixing any type of your missing or broken agents, installing patches, application updates, blocking or restricting rogue or non-compliant devices, as well as bringing all of your unagentable into ownership, knowing it's yours by fingerprinting those devices and saying, I know this is a camera and not a Mac spoof device. So with Forescout and Microsoft together, we're able to bring all those blind spots under protection so your attack surface is sealed. Kind of walk this through from a device, simplistically looking at how a device follows this. Microsoft and Forescout Zero Trust model, as prescribed by NIST. Basically, we have a device simply trying to access a resource. We don't know if it should, but Zero Trust demands that we consider this untrusted. And so with that, we're going to need to decide, can it access the resource? And we do that with a policy decision point, that big list of products there. But what does that actually mean? Once we get out of the NIST model and into the field, into the trenches, what does that mean? Basically, for this device, I'm looking at the following. Is it authorized? That could mean, is it Intune enrolled? Is it domain joined? Is it traditional AD joined? Is it Entra joined? Is it compliant? Does it have Defender for Endpoint reporting in? And does it have current definitions? Is it Intune compliant? These are the questions that are being asked by a policy decision point. And once it gets that information from the policy information point, then it's able to say, yes, I'm authorized. Great. Yes, I'm compliant. Once we know these details about the device, we can say, the decision point says this is a device that's allowed on, no enforcement is necessary, it can access the resource, off it goes, all this happening in real time, and at the same time as well, simultaneously. Now, the Zero Trust requirement, right, is that I keep saying it happens continuously, just not once. So we're constantly assessing that compliance, and is it authorized as well as its risk. For example, in risk, we're looking, it's relevant now is the post-quantum cryptography. Is it compliant on that regard? Again, these could be your compliance standards, but we're checking continuously. So what happens? It's in the middle of a session and MD stops reporting definitions. Maybe it went offline for a little bit, and definitions are more than 7 days old, so it's susceptible to 0 days. Well, now it's flagged as non-compliant. This changes that decision point to say that it shouldn't be accessing the resource anymore. And so it's time to consider this untrusted, automatically, and start to throw in those enforcement points that we were talking about. Now, again, keep in mind, restrict, one of many options. So perhaps when you first start down a Zero Trust journey, you just want to notify and remediate. You don't want to start with blocking anything, because you want to see how egregious some of these and how the volume of some of these infractions and openings in your attack surface are. So you start with notifying. Let's send out a SIM message and an email to a distro. Then let's move to remediation. Can I fix this myself? Can I start the Defender with a script? Can I send an API request to start it with Defender, for example? Or do I want to go ahead and restrict it, segment it to a remediation VLAN, and have that happen while that blast radius is reduced? It's up to you how you respond, but this should be an automated action. And as long as that is considered untrusted, it'll stay in that state until it is remediated and brought back into the blue. So returning to this visual here, with that in mind, we can see how this same process applied to your managed and your unmanaged creates that protected attack surface. And that is essentially boiling down what NIST is trying to say with Zero Trust is you want to make a decision at each point you can with the information that's gathered by Forescout and by Microsoft, and then you want to feed that back so that Forescout and Microsoft can together make that decision and then together enforce that zero trust policy against your network. So to conclude, essentially, what Forescout's doing here is discovering what's on the network, it's assessing it, and then it is controlling it. And the control is really a big factor because, like I had said, information without action is just liability. And so it's very important that we automate that control so that we can govern continuously. And that boils down to what zero trust is in a nutshell, and how NIST prescribes you do it with Forescout and Microsoft. Thank you.